again. So I wanted to film a little intro to loosely walking. It's a really big topic, very complicated. Um, and so I wanted to film one without our dog in here so I can kind of just go over the basics of what we mean by loosely walking. Obviously, our goal is for our dog to walk on a nice loose leash and not pull, basically not be pulling us. So their range is going to be our leash. I am personally fine with my dog going to the end of the leash as long as they are not actually pulling forward. So as long as he's at the end of his leash, he's not actually physically pulling me, we're just walking together, I'm fine with that. My expectations is when he hits the end of the leash, if he actually hits it, he either loosens up and walks with me or he stops and waits for me. So we do actually have to train that. Dogs do not understand that innately. And that is one thing that I think that people don't quite understand, that a dog it's not natural for a dog to walk on a leash. Dogs naturally walk faster than us. They have 4 legs. So the reason why we have so many problems with our dogs is really there's 2 issues. One is that dogs just walk faster than us. So they hit the end of the leash, pulling can be reinforcing, and if we're not doing something to alleviate that or train against that, they're just going to get in the habit that that's what they do on leash. Is you search forward, you continue to pull. It's reinforcing, and once again, we're slow. We're just naturally slower than them. So really, it's not them being bad dogs. It's just them not understanding that that pressure is actually a cue to stop pulling or to change direction. But we can train that. That's not a problem at all. The other big issue is distractions. So that is more of a complicated issue because then we get into why is the dog distracted? Is it because they're excited? Is it because they're actually afraid? What is going on with the dog? So that is another issue of the other reason they pull is towards either a desirable thing or sometimes actually it's a reaction because lunging does not always mean they want to get there. Sometimes lunging means they're reacting because they might be afraid of that thing. And that's important. It's important to pay attention to our dogs. It's important to try to be mindful of what our dogs are feeling and thinking because our response to those things is going to be different based on that. But first of all, we're just going to talk about what we're doing with the leash. So we have our leash. It's 6 feet. Let's just pretend this is our dog. So we've got a dog here, care dog. And we've got our leash. So that means anywhere in this range is the acceptable zone. When I'm going to reward my dog, I want there to be a little bit of slack in the leash, and I want them to be within our bubble, our acceptable bubble. Our acceptable bubble is 6 feet around us. When I'm rewarding, I ideally want it to be in this proximity bubble around me. Don't really want to reward way up here. Maybe in some cases I would if I'm trying to do some engagement, some tossing. Don't really want to reward back there. So even if I'm luring the dog, like maybe the dog is stopped, maybe they're frozen, I do maybe a lure on their nose, I'm actually going to lure the dog forward into my bubble before I release the treat. Because we want them to learn that this zone around us, this proximity zone, is where they're going to get paid. This is the area you want to be. So say we're on a leash, we can do a little free shaping where say our dog just happens to be in our bubble. We can say good and treat. This is also why some people use a clicker because when we're walking, sometimes it's difficult to have our timing correct. So if we have a clicker, they get in the bubble. It's just a good opportunity where the leash is loose, click, treat. But if our timing's good with our voice, we can do that too. It's really completely up to you what you think is the easiest. I do a combination of both. So if I am walking, and maybe I notice my dog has not been perfect. Maybe they've been pulling a little more than I want. I might switch to a clicker because that might mean to me I haven't been as clear to my dog as I should be or as consistent as I should be. So that's just the first thing is when they're in our bubble, we can reward at any time. We just want to remember that when they're getting the reinforcement, it's better to be here with a loose lead. The other thing to remember is what happens when our dog pulls and maybe we really don't even want to train right now. Maybe we just want to be on a regular walk, a decompression walk. And that's fine. We don't have to train on every walk. However, we don't want to actually get in the habit of pulling. So what happens if my dog hits the end of the leash? Well, what we don't want to do is give a correction. That's aversive. That is going to, it's just really not a good thing. It's kind of in the negative bucket of interactions. And it can really just lead to the dog's arousal levels or just general threshold. It can raise it. It can not be a good thing. It can make those arousal levels higher. But what we could do is, this is a technique called stroking the lead. It's from T-Touch. And I might just start doing this with my lead. So I still have my lead attached to my arm. We're being safe. But when the dog is maybe at the end of the lead, maybe they haven't really gone into a full pull yet, I'm just going to do this because it alleviates the pressure on the lead. So if the dog's pulling forward, I start doing this. It immediately releases a little bit of that pressure. So instead of that pulling being reinforcing, I'm just kind of letting this lead go through my hands like this, so that dog isn't getting reinforced by that pulling. Some dogs, that is actually really powerful. So, it depends on the dog. Depends why they're pulling, but it might just be just enough so that pull doesn't get reinforced, especially if we're just taking a casual walk. So if I'm on our walks with our dog friends, I'm distracted. I'm talking to my friends. But if he starts hitting that end of the lead, I might just give it a little leash stroke so that at least he's not being reinforced for it, because we really don't want that. So that's just a little trick to use. The other things that we might do is say our dog is just like really over threshold, that you can tell they're over threshold because they are jerky, they're maybe trying to bolt, they're, just, you can tell they can't focus, they can't take food. That all of those are signs. Maybe they're drooling, maybe they're panting really heavy, but not because they're tired, just because they're distressed. But the biggest indicator is not being able to take food. If you're seeing that your dog is over threshold, that means your dog is probably not going to be able to learn. We don't punish our dogs for that. It's not their fault. It's an emotion. They're not in a state where they can learn. So what we have to do is make sure they're not practicing bad behavior or undesirable behavior when they're in that state. And then we need to get them to a state where they can learn. So we need to alleviate that distress in some way. And the biggest way to do it is just distance. And I know that's really hard when we're walking on a path, because we live in in suburbs. We live near a city where a lot of these parks that we go to are busy. So it can be hard when you're at a park like that to get your dog under threshold. But we can do it by practicing in a safe location where we have an appropriate distance where our dog can start to actually learn. The more we drill, the more we work, the better our dog is going to be in those situations where we are over threshold, because they're going to have a better tolerance for that when we have the tools that they can use to cope, basically the coping mechanisms. And there are also counter conditioning mechanisms where maybe those things that scare them, we're counter conditioning it to make them feel better about it. But it takes time. Those are not things that happen overnight. Those are things that not even happen in a week or a month. They're things that take a long time. So we need to use a combination of management, which is just basically managing our dog on a leash without really training. It's just managing our dog in a positive way that prevents our dog from practicing undesirable behavior, but is also still positive. Like, we still want to have this, we want to allow our dog to enjoy their walk. We don't want to be I mean, maybe we do want to be training constantly, but we probably don't want to every walk. So we need some management tools that we can use in those situations when our dog can't learn or we can't learn because maybe we're distracted. And then we also need to work in some training on our walks, because when the dog is under threshold and they can learn, we should be taking those opportunities. Also, a way to do it too is to just have basic check-ins on a walk, where we might have a 30-minute walk and maybe 5 times out of the walk we ask for a check-in, to make sure that the dog knows we're on their, like, we're on the dog's radar. We want to be connected to the dog. Maybe 90% of the walk our dog is enjoying sniffing and enjoying just walking along, like not pulling, so we're cool. But we still want to remind them that we're attached. We still want to remind them that, we're connected here. So we would ask for some check-ins at periodic times in the walk. The reason why I explain it is I just want to explain the framework, because we're going to try to break this down and show you the tools that we can use in different times, because there are multiple ways that we can achieve loosely walking. Some work better for different dogs. However, most of them do actually work if you're consistent. It's the consistency that's really difficult. And I will admit, I am not always consistent on Ramon's walks, mostly because it is very different when me and him are walking alone than when we're walking in a group. I mean, that's like a true confessional. Like, it is really hard when you have a dog he's like a 10 on the reactivity scale. So he is a dog where if we are attuned and I am on it with paying attention to him, he is very good, because he knows these tools. He knows them. We've drilled them. But once we get into a situation where I am inconsistent, his consistency drops too. And with a less reactive dog, you could get that less. I have a Caden as well, and Caden requires about 5% of the attention that Rama does. So how much this requires on your part is really based on your dog. It's based on their threshold levels, how over aroused they get, how likely they are to go over threshold, and it also is based on how much work we've done. Like, have we been working at home in an environment where they can stay under threshold? Your dog's going to be much better off if you do. But once again, the other thing to remember is we also have to be as consistent as possible, because if we're not consistent, our dog is not going to be reliable. Once again, I'm guilty of that too. So don't feel bad if you haven't been reliable, because we all do it. Every one of us. But one way, I mean, there's different ways that we can work on that. And the more your dog practices, the better they're going to be, and the less perfect and on it you might have to be. So that is the basic principles here of loosely walking. We are going to try to break it down, and we're going to try to tackle this on camera with my limited equipment. And I thank you so much for sticking with me through all of this. You're great.